What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Evo build. This week, we're going to be tackling the fuel system. This car already has a somewhat upgraded fuel system in it, and we'll start at the back and just work our way forward. In the tank, it is using a Bulletproof Racing fuel pump hanger, and it is a dual pump hanger, but currently it only has one 525 liter per hour pump in it, or the pump out of a Hellcat. And then it is using the factory feed and return lines still. It has an STM fuel rail, and that is supplying fuel to Fuel Injector Clinic 2150cc fuel injectors. Now, on the previous setup with the HKS cams on about 34 pounds of boost, we were kind of hitting the upper limit of that fuel system on E85. In order to prevent that from happening with the new cams and trying to run more boost, we're going to upgrade the whole system. Instead of the factory fuel lines, we're going to be upgrading to all aftermarket fuel lines. That will be -8 AN feed line and a -6 AN return line. I know some Evo guys use the factory feed line as the return line whenever they're upgrading the fuel lines. I'm just going to do the whole thing. The single 525, I'm going to use the other side of that hanger, and we're going to be adding a 450. I am going to use the 525 as the main pump, and then we're going to use the Haltech to switch on the 450 pump when we hit a certain boost pressure, which is where this guy comes in. Also from Bulletproof Racing, this is their Billet relay box. With this combined with the Bulletproof Racing hanger, it actually does some really cool stuff. It utilizes the factory plug plugged into the hanger, and then it feeds this little connector here out of the top of the hanger as well to trigger the main pump. And then it has this little blue wire here that'll trigger the second pump. And then it has a power wire and a ground wire, and then 2 relays with 2 fuses. Everything's built right into this box. And like I said, used together with their hanger, this is very much a plug and play system. You plug in the factory connector into the new hanger, and then everything is just kind of already set up for you. It's very, very simple. When I first got the hanger from Bulletproof, I did not buy the Billet relay box. I simply used a relay that I had because I had already kind of cut up the factory connector back there, which is why I have this. This is a brand new factory connector with all of the pins and everything so that I can rewire that to where it works like factory again. And then I have an external fuel filter that we'll also be adding. I have to find a place to mount that. But that's sort of the plan here. Luckily, when I parked this car to start working on it, the gas light was on. So there's not much fuel in the tank. But the first step here is going to be pulling out all of the factory fuel lines so that I have a nice blank slate to work with. So we'll get started there. Okay, so like I said, in the car was already the Bulletproof fuel hanger, and it is set up for 2 pumps, even though it only has 1 in it currently. Now there are a few things that I'm gonna have to change about this hanger considering we're going to all new fuel lines. But the first one is we have to get this pump in here. So we'll do that, and then these fittings, like I said, I was using the stock fuel lines previously, so these fittings that are in there now will have to be swapped out for some AN fittings, and then this should be ready to go back in the car. Okay, there we go. We now have 2 pumps. The main pump being a 525 liter per hour, and then the secondary pump is a 450. And then we replaced the fittings on the top here from the factory fittings to some new AN fittings. So this is ready to go back in the car now, and then we got to get all of the fuel lines out. Got this back in there, new fittings in. So the siphon, that one will stay there. that one stays the same, but the return line and the feed line now have to be pulled out. So let's get those out of there. We are gonna have to lower the tank a little bit in order to do that. And I hear that there's a bolt on top of the tank somewhere right about here that's pretty difficult to get to. So let's go ahead and tackle that. Okay guys, so I got all of the fuel lines out, all of the brackets. I'll make sure to come up with some type of solution for having the lines attached to the bottom of the car. I think I have something in mind. There's not a whole lot of footage of me pulling those lines out because I was on my back underneath the car with everything like 2 inches from my face. So they're out, which is a good thing. Next step will be to, got a bunch of stuff in my eyes. This is always fun. But the next step is going to be probably mounting the filter underneath the car so that I have a point of reference for where I need to stop and start the feed line. And then from there, I'll have to make the line from the top of the tank to the filter, and then from the filter to the fuel rail. And then I'll need to make the return line from the ethanol sensor all the way back to the tank. Lots of lines to make, but first I'm gonna try and get footage of mounting up the filter underneath the car. No promises, because it's, again, gonna be 2 inches from my face. Okay, so we're here under the car. I actually ended up drilling some holes directly underneath the driver's seat so that I could put some riv nuts in there, and then this is how we're gonna mount the new fuel filter. There we go. Fuel filter mounted up. Now I have a starting point for the feed line to go to the fuel rail, and I have a point to go from the filter back to the tank. Let's make some hoses. I really have a love-hate relationship with making my own AN lines. I love how much money it saves me, but I hate doing it. These lines are all PTFE, so they're compatible with E85. They have this plastic lining inside of them so that it won't deteriorate when you use E85. We're gonna start with the fuel line from the tank to the fuel filter. That is a -8 AN. And if you don't know how AN sizes work, the dash number, so that number that's in that size, so -8, is always of a 1/16 of an inch. So -8 is 8/16, so it's a ½ inch. -4 is 4/16, it's a quarter of an inch. Math. I think that's right. Don't quote me. As you can see here, send it, that's the feed. So this line here is going to 90 off of this and then come around this side and then run where it needs to underneath the car. And then the return is easier, it just kind of goes straight. So we'll make, the first line will be this 90 off of here, and then that'll be an 8 AN fitting, and then we'll run it, and then we'll measure it out to see where we hit the fuel filter, and then we'll cut it there, and then we'll make the other end of the line, and then we'll put this one on the car. I do always find it easiest to put the fittings in a vise for this part, and it's also nice to put just a little bit of lubrication. I got some little bit of oil on there to help this get started in this hose. These fittings are very soft, so they're very easy to scratch. And I realize that I should be using an aluminum wrench, but I don't have one this big. So I'm not. This will be under the car anyway, so no one will see it if I do scratch it. And I don't think people on the internet criticize people for doing things the wrong way. If you guys are thinking, wow, that vise is in a stupid place, because I don't have much workbench space, my garage is small. Okay, I'm gonna go underneath the car. You guys stay here and watch through this little hole, see if it pops up. Hey, look at that. Okay, so while I had this end hooked up, I went underneath the car, measured out how much hose I needed, and then marked it with a little piece of tape. So we'll cut it here, put the other end on, and then we'll have one line done. We'll get this thrown on there real quick and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so we got our first end on our return line. So I'm gonna hook this up to the tank the same way that I did the feed line, and then I'll run this all the way up to the front of the car where it's gonna hook to the ethanol sensor, mark it, and then cut it and put the other end on it, and then the return line will be done. Okay, this whole line is now complete. We'll run this underneath the length of the whole car, and because we'll be done with all the fittings on the top of the tank, we'll be able to bolt the tank back up into its original position, and then we'll only have 2 more lines to make. What's up? I'm down here. Both the fuel lines from the tank are now run to where they're running to. So the tank is now bolted back up to where it should be. Next, we're gonna be installing this bad boy. Gotta find a place to mount it. I'm probably gonna put it in the trunk. I already have a power wire run back there from when I had a relay powering the pump the first time. Really, we just need to find a place to mount this, and everything else is just plug and play. So let's get going. As you can see, the trunk is pretty empty, so I can kind of mount it wherever I want. As you can see from these holes here, the battery used to be back here, and I might put it back here again to clean up the engine bay even a little bit more. I think if I do put the battery back here, it'll probably go back in this spot again. So I'm thinking maybe somewhere here, because the fuel pump is just on the other side right here, so it'd be pretty easy to run it through like that little hole right there. Just run the wire straight to the fuel pump. So I think I'm gonna put it right there. So I'm gonna drill some holes and put some riv nuts down and then mount it right there. I think that'll work. Okay, there we go, all mounted up. The power wire is ran, the fuel pump plug-in wire is run. I do have this random blue wire still sticking out of here, and this is the wire that will trigger the second fuel pump, so we will have to run that up to the new ECU, so that is something that we still need to do. All right, we'll quickly go over what we got done so far. We got the additional fuel pump put into the hanger, got the hanger put back in the car. We got the fuel filter mounted underneath the car. We got the feed line run from the hanger to the fuel filter, and then we got the return line run from the ethanol sensor on the firewall all the way back to the hanger as well. We also had the billet relay box mounted in the trunk. We got it wired up to the battery, and we also have it wired up to the fuel pumps themselves. The only other wire that we still have to run is from the ECU to activate the second pump. And you might be saying, but you still have the fuel lines to run from the filter to the fuel rail and from the fuel rail to the fuel pressure regulator. And you're right. But right now, the car doesn't have an intake manifold on it, because next week, we're gonna be installing this. My fancy new wiring harness. And while I'm doing that, I would like as much access to the firewall as possible. Having the intake manifold off will allow me to run these wires exactly where I want to run them, be able to tuck everything away nice and neat while having enough access to kind of the backside of the engine and the firewall. And then once that's all done, we will put the intake manifold back on, run those last 2 fuel lines, get the ECU in there, and then it's time to do a little bit more wiring for the dash. So we're so close. We're so close. Just a few more things to go before we can try and fire this thing up with me loading a tune onto it, not knowing what I'm doing at all. So stick around for that, for sure. But if you do want to see more of this and you're interested in exactly how much power we'll make when it's all finished, make sure you subscribe, share this video, and like this video, and do all the YouTube things. And then come back next week and watch me get all tangled up in some wires. See you then.